It always throws me on Zoom when it says recording in process. I've got the Rugby League Express here, which you can't see if you listen to the podcast. And Phil has as well, because there's no other trade papers these days. But I may as well throw it away because all the news happened after it went to print. I don't think even Brian McDermott's in here, is he? I don't know. Because that was late on, was that a Sunday night?
Yeah. Well, who knows what day of the week it is with games being played at unscheduled and unusual times.
I mean, obviously no one knows what day it is because they listen to the podcast or whatever, but happy Rob Burrow Day, Phil.
Yes, absolutely. And if nothing else, then if people can still think about and promote the great man and the work that's been done with MND, just been made a patron along with Kevin Sinfield, who's doing another marathon this time, not so much for fundraising, but profile awareness, then everything we can do to promote him and to use him as a key inspirational tool for everyone in life, then keep doing it.
And still, just name the bloody man of the match award at the grand final after him. No one's bothered about the past. It's what they used to give to the win of the Premiership, which no one cared about.
There's got to be, and I'm sure there will be, some kind of permanency to the job that he did in Super League as a player, which should not be forgotten. You know, clearly all of this is geared around his fight now. He's promoting his book, which is due out in I think the 21st of August. There'll be some more news about that coming out soon, which is fantastic. But what we shouldn't forget is he's an absolutely brilliant rugby league player who will be deserving of a man of the match award, irrespective of what was happening now in his life. And we need to keep him front and centre. And he and his good lady, we should not forget what Lindsay's doing as well behind the scenes. The fact that, again, a little bit like Gareth Southgate, he's got this wider vision of what's happening means to people, and I don't keep wanting using the word inspirational because let's just take it as a given that he is. But I think the hope more than anything that he's giving to other MND sufferers is just fantastic and essential, and if anything, that's more praiseworthy than his own personal plight.
Don't tell me he reads too many books like Gareth Southgate is alleged to have done. Dangerous Gareth Southgate. That's a man who, if he wasn't a football manager, would be working in an office somewhere doing something boring, but a dangerous figure.
Well, I'd like to see him in politics somewhere along the line, but as I indeed would with Mr. Sinfield, because I think the world would be a better place for both of those people having a say in where we go.
Well, indeed. But before we upset people by talking about politics, let's talk about people getting sacked because, sacked is the right word for Hunslet because it was in their press release on yesterday afternoon. Gary Thornton losing his job, who's been there for a long time now, and they'd won 4 in a row, and then they lose to Coventry, and then that's it, which obviously we don't know the ins and outs of things, but it seems a bit of a knee-jerk reaction. I know they said in the statement something about changing things up and this and the other, but they just won 4 games in a row. So it's not as if they lost 4 games in a row and then decided to change things. It's a bit of an odd one.
I think there's 2 sides to this story here. First of all, nothing should detract from the greatest result in Coventry's history. And the fact that they were, again, absolutely gone with 10 minutes of the game to go, came back with 3 converted tries to pull the match out of the final. I think Alan Robinson was on social media saying, talk all you like about Hunslet and how this affects them, but, could we have a little bit of credit too that, they didn't come here on an off day. We actually played superbly well, and we've been building to all of this. And everybody who regularly listens to this podcast knows that we're big fans of what's going on in Coventry, not least with the fact that they are probably creating more junior sides in and around the club than anyone in any area, whether it's been going for 120 years or 10 minutes. I think also they're a self-sustained club financially, and I think that this then relates back to Hunslet, that we have no idea what is going to happen with finances for League One. We talked about this a lot. The likelihood is it'll be nothing. There's a possibility it might be a token amount of money, but it's not going to be enough to keep them going. So there is a massive scramble amongst the if you like, established teams to get out of League One this season before perhaps those changes come in. And Hunslet would have felt that they would be one of the favourites to do that. And you look at the league table, and clearly, they're not in at the moment a position to challenge the likes of Barrow or Workington, and that would be a real disappointment, I think, for the Hunslet board. I think this is just the straw that broke the camel's back as regards a result. There's already people saying, Matt Diskin got relieved of his duties at Oldham. Will he be going to Hunslet? That's the nature of the speculation beast. I think Hunslet will pick up another coach relatively quickly, but it'll be like everything. It'll be more to do with have they got the right mix of players on board to mount a challenge later in the year? Is there a possibility, of course, that we'll still have a change in structure with all the other things that are going on in the world of rugby league at the moment, not least, will we end up with two divisions? And if we do, will Hunslet and or Coventry be included in it? Will it be done on finishing position on the field or merit off the field? So it is a significant result. It's a shame whenever a coach loses his job. But I just think the focus for this should be what a fantastic afternoon for Coventry.
Are we going to have to march on wherever the RFL's based now for kicking out Chorley and Nottingham and whoever else the other one was? I can't remember now. Blackpool. Because the Trafford Borough Chorley thing, it all gets confusing after a while.
Well, you mentioned Chorley, and again, this is sort of appropriate. I know that we'll go on to talk about some of the other topics and questions that we've had sent in, but the former chairman of Chorley, who is now the Right Honourable Speaker of the House of Commons, Sir Lindsay Hoyle, has been on the BBC Rugby League podcast this week, saying, "Well, I think we're allowed to mention it. That's where he was. There's no point denying it." And joined again the clamour for the need for the game to look at itself. And I know that we'll go on and talk about a lot of the issues of why are we in a situation now where in a professional sport games are being forfeited? What does that look like from the outside? And sometimes we forget, we shout at ourselves on the inside, and we don't realise the harm that might be being done for those looking in on the outside. And again, whether you believe in all of the things that Lindsay Hoyle is asking for, what he's actually saying is we need an independent review. Some people are talking about commission that should take the game forward with greater independence than the RFL board currently has. That's what some people are asking for, like Shane Richardson. What Lindsay Hoyle is saying is even before we get to that point, there needs to be an independent review. People who are attached to but outside of the game getting round a table and saying, what do we look like? Where are our failings? What do we want to be? What sort of things do we want to institute? Again, that noise surrounding the game about something is not right and it needs to happen relatively quickly as to where we're going and how we're going to get to wherever it is we want to be. That's a significant voice. Somebody who is seen on the television trying to keep politicians to the letter of the law, and someone who, when you say Sir Lindsay has said something, people outside of rugby league will listen to that. So I don't think it's any coincidence. He's been president at Warrington. He's a huge supporter of the club. He knows that things aren't quite right at the moment, and has a platform to say we need to look at that. When people like that talk, we have to listen.
Yeah, he was down at the Mobile Rock at the start of 2020 before everything happened. Watching Warrington lose to Wakefield, which was good. My only point on this is the same one as ever. Is it's okay coming out and saying this now. He's obviously been an MP for a while. The all parliamentary rugby league group, again, we go back to the Bradford thing. It's all right them coming out and banging on about academies and such. Where were they when the whole, Bradford collapsed 3 times on themselves, or everything else that's happened in rugby league? They seem to, hide away and just, have dinners and stuff. Be more proactive.
Well, I hopefully this is the start of it, but I think what it shows is that it's going to be very difficult for even the people getting around the table from either Super League or the RFL to ignore the fact that there is an increasing clamour to be seen to be doing. I mean, I hate more than mentioning another podcast to mention the words rugby and union on here. But they have just come up with a plan for their sport for post-COVID. Now, what they're doing may have absolutely no relevance to us. They're increasing the Premiership. They're not having promotion relegation for, I think, 2-3 years to allow the clubs that are in there the chance to regenerate. They may well pull up the drawbridge when they get to the 14 that they feel should constitute whatever their Premiership is. They're also looking at constitution of match day squads so that more homegrown and younger players have to be named in this. What they have as a plan seems to be a sport that is moving forward. We at the moment, I think everybody would agree, and it's not positive or a negative or a realistic comment, we are stagnant. We saw that the press conference that Ken Davey did, and it's basically, we are going to do something. Well, almost that point of we are going to is past. What are we doing and how quickly can we do it? There's a real urgency about rugby league at the moment. And again, if you relate it back to what isn't happening on the field, as in the latest round of games, we only managed to get 2 of them played. There are some real genuine concerns about how we look as a sport and how quickly we can get away from that image that we're faltering at the moment.
The following comments are of Kev's and not necessarily those of 4020 Live nor its things. I noticed last week Ken Davey was saying everything was wonderful and marvellous in the game. He does take after his leader, Boris Johnson, delusional. That was Kev. Yeah.
I mean, again, I think having a press conference, fine. It gives copy to the press, but only have one if you've actually got something to say. And the problem with that press conference was, what did we expect him to say? He is the executive chairman of a group that clearly at the moment, is floundering for some of the circumstances outside of their control, some of their own making. His own club this week now has not been able to fulfill a fixture, which is, maybe perfectly understandable. But what it means is, if you're going to have a press conference and you're in that position and you have to paint a positive picture, then it looks like you're in denial. Sometimes it's better to say nothing until there's something to say, rather than coming on and painting the garden is rosy in the knowledge that it clearly isn't.
His own club's women's team, who I've mentioned before, don't have names on their shirts, but do have numbers, which is, aesthetics, fine. They couldn't even tweet out the team sheet on Sunday. Now, I know women's teams, I know it's all complicated relationships between clubs and foundations and this and that and the other, but when it says Huddersfield Giants on the marquee and it says it on their chest, it says Huddersfield Giants, they are the Huddersfield Giants, I can't find a team sheet anywhere. That's disrespectful. That's the chairman of the competition. I know it's not I know it's all complicated, but it reflects on the club. They weren't the only ones this weekend.
More than that, though, I think everybody says, with hindsight, it's really easy to criticise what's happened this year and you couldn't really have foreseen. I think you can. I think there comes to a point where you say, if you make a conscious decision as 12 owners or executives at the Super League clubs to play 25 rounds, which immediately means you're playing midweek fixtures, which means that you're in some ways, and maybe it isn't too strong a word, desecrating an international window, then whatever happens on the back of that, you have to live with, because you made the wrong decision in the first place. And I think we looked at all of those fixtures and said, this isn't a year for 25 rounds and loop fixtures, and especially leading into a hoped-for World Cup. We understand the economics, absolutely 100%, that you need to get people in your stadium as quickly as possible and a number to generate finance. The problem is, if you do it wrong and part way into the date that you thought you were going to have people back, it gets put back. You have to be reactive to that. And last year we saw teams doing incredible things by changing fixtures almost overnight to make sure games went ahead for Sky. This year, we could have taken at least one of those rounds out when we knew that there was going to be an extension to the restrictions, and we didn't. So now in those rounds where teams are finding it difficult to get guys on the field, I go back to what we said at the beginning. What impression does it give to the outside? Let's say you don't know a lot about rugby league. Let's say you're a national radio broadcaster and you're scheduled to have a game on your station, 2.5 hours of bespoke rugby league coverage, and the night before you're told that you can't broadcast that game. And the reason is because one of the teams can't get 17 players. Now, there may be extenuating circumstances why they can't. And I think we also need to look at, and this is going off in 100 tangents, and I do apologise, but, the COVID rulings that you've got to fulfil 7 people are not available because of COVID. One of the things I think we've learned from Ian Watson at Huddersfield, and certainly from other clubs who are talking about some of their players who are coming back from COVID, it doesn't mean that just because they've come out of that isolation period that they can automatically play. And I think it was Ian Watson that said, one of his players had come back having lost 8 kilograms. Well, that's at the start of a pre-season again. You can't do that in the middle of a competition. If that player is not available, he may not have tested positive or come out of his track and trace period, but he can't play because of COVID. So I think we need to be really careful about how we decide when a game is on, when a game is off, how we punish a team if they can. But I think if you jam the schedule at the beginning, this was going to happen. This was always going to happen.
And some teams will play their rearranged fixture and some teams won't because they just get the 24-0 against their name. I do wonder, and this is speaking purely cynicism, it did seem last year that some teams tried very, very hard to get a team on the field. However, that was made up. A bit like the England cricketers who've had to pick a whole new squad. They just put out whoever they could find and fulfilled the fixtures because they knew they had to. Whereas this year, because not every game's on TV, I don't know if that same pressure is there. I know there are obviously injuries, there are obviously other factors, but I don't know if there's that same pressure there. And people will say, people on Twitter will say, are teams picking and choosing games? We've been asked that. I'm trying to find it where it was. Here it is, Neil. Starting to look like clubs are choosing if they play or not with COVID, which means they're fresh and fit for the games they choose. That's how it looks to the outside world. I mean,
that's the exact point, that it's not about the actual realism and logistics within the game and us shouting at each other. It's actually, what on earth does this look like to the outside world? I know we're not comparing ourselves to soccer. You can't, but let's compare ourselves to maybe Championship football or League One football. Now, if you got the release that I don't know, Accrington Stanley couldn't play this week because they couldn't raise a team, you would think that there's something amateurish about that. We are painting this picture of the words Super League, and I think again we need to divorce two things here. There are some clubs and players playing 4 games in 15 days, and they are doing the most ridiculous, sterling, Herculean job. And I think we've seen, some guys who just shouldn't be out there. The duty of care thing is one thing, but they're doing it. And there are other teams that haven't played for 17 days, and the integrity of the competition is lost because of that. And we've mismanaged that as a sport, and the image and portrayal of seeing postponed or 24-0, that should be in League Express amongst an amateur team that had a stag do and couldn't go and fulfill their fixture, and it's awarded 24-0. That should never have a place in a top flight professional division.
It's difficult because people will see that, and Rugby League, unfortunately, in terms of national media, it's one of those sports where bad news stories play much better than positive news stories. I'll give you an example. In ice hockey, the Stanley Cup finals going on at the moment, the big end of season tournament in the NHL in North America. On the BBC website, there's no reports on every game, but there is a news. A netminder, a goalkeeper, sadly passed away a few days ago, and that is news. But actual games is not news because bad news is more important. We are at that stage where, teams not fulfilling fixtures, you say, is more important than someone scoring 6 tries in a game, because who cares about someone scoring 6 tries in a game? It's not news. It happens. It's a thing. We've gone into this situation now where, it's not as if it doesn't happen in every other sport. We just mentioned the cricket team having to pick a whole new squad, some who will never play for England again. The Lions tour, which I've got no interest in whatsoever, but heavily hyped, massive hype about it on Sky, it's on national radio, that's in jeopardy because the South Africans keep getting COVID, all the teams they're playing. So their games are all being shifted around. They might have to play Georgia at the weekend or something. When we're not in an island, we're not in a bubble, and that's the problem. We're not in bubbles. We know coming up next Saturday, Wembley Stadium, Challenge Cup final, big amount of TV, BBC One, only time of the year that we get the big block of TV. 4 clubs playing there. We've got the 1895 Cup final as well. We just had the Wheelchair Cup final postponed, which thankfully no one really knew about, so it was all right, and it just kind of slid back, which probably will work out better because more people will be able to go to the final in August, fingers crossed. I know we've asked this question privately, but let's open it up to the people and say, what happens, Phil, next week? It's all right talking about all the, we've had months about talking about academies and how great they are and this and that and the other. We've got clubs with academies who can't fill squads. We've got the Challenge Cup final next Saturday. Fingers crossed, nothing happens to anyone, of course. But what if it does?
Well, again, like you, and as we've said, I would just have these teams in cotton wool now. And as long as it's the same for all of the 4 teams that are competing, I don't think it's showing favouritism to anybody. But I wouldn't be playing their games this weekend. I would be saying, you need to keep your players as near in restrictive conditions as it's possible and feasible to do. Clearly, very hard to do with part-time players, especially who are out at work. Also difficult to do when maybe your child comes home and you've been told to isolate. So you're not going to be able to stop every eventuality. But what you can do is be in charge of what you can be in charge of. And I think because, with the greatest respect to the way the Super League standings are at the moment, overall, the competition is compromised at the moment, then I think taking the fixtures out for Castleford and St Helens this weekend to protect them for something that is bigger is what we should be doing. And of course, that again comes up with this bridge that says, but the Challenge Cup is an RFL event and Super League is a Super League event, and oil and water shall not mix. And that's why, again, going back to people like Sir Lindsay Hoyle, we need a fresh pair of eyes and say, look, it's all very well Ken David talking about realignment without actually defining what that word means. But we're not even big enough to be having 2 lots of bodies sat alongside each other with different sets of responsibilities. Where are we going? What does the sport need to look like? Not tomorrow when they all get round the table and decide what they're going to be called and they all love each other again. Who is going to make the important decisions? And is there going to be some form of resistance from club owners because they still have perceived power? Is there going to be a willingness from the RFL board of directors to impose when clearly they have no money at their disposal because they're relying on the Super League clubs to fund them at them? There are so many issues that need resolving around how do we move forward. But yes, I'm with you that one of the things that we should now be doing with infection rates as they are is be proactive to the fact that Challenge Cup final has to go ahead. It has to be a spectacle. There will be at least 40 to 45,000 people in the stadium. It will look great. It will sound great. The York Featherstone game for me is equally as important, and it means as much to the teams in the Championship. You look at the top of each division at the moment are clubs who, for no fault of their own, have had difficulty filling their fixtures because they're from another country. They've still managed to be top of the league. So we are going to get a competitive end to the league season, whether the odd game is cancelled or not. If you do it for the right reasons, it makes sense. You look like a sport that has a plan. If you just willy-nilly have 24-0 and then suddenly Castleford play the week before Wembley, 10 players get injured and they can't raise a side for the cup final, or the same thing happens to St Helens as an outbreak of COVID, what do we look like?
Because we're not talking about a normal year where, if you did have an injury crisis, it happens. That's the phrase, isn't it? You just have to stick a load of kids in, blah, blah, blah. These are not normal times, despite what some people may think. York Fed might be the main event. The pre-match might be the schools game. I don't know even if that's on this year. I don't know. But yeah, just hope everything comes through this weekend, okay? Because, as we saw, ahead of the grand final in 2017, one person can change history. And hopefully it doesn't. Hopefully there's no issues. Hopefully everything, everyone's keeping their fingers crossed and everything, but we can't control everything.
Well, we have to be honest as well that whilst we would like to think that everything we do is out there and people understand and appreciate, there literally are probably 2 or 3 times in a year where we are noticed beyond the traditional support. Now, I'm not talking about people that even necessarily pay to go and watch games. I'm talking about corporates that might be watching, potential sponsors of the sport or individual clubs. We only get to sell to them in the widest sense for the Challenge Cup final, for the grand final, and maybe internationals. Well, especially internationals if we actually have meaningful internationals. So we have to, because of the parlous state that we're in at the moment, economically more than anything, protect those events. So I am absolutely of a mind that we need to be really, really careful to make sure that we do everything we possibly can for Wembley to go ahead in the manner in which we can show ourselves off to our very, very best.
Saints and Castle can just sign half of the St George Illawarra squad anyway, so it'd be all right. What's that guy they've sacked, Vaughan? He'll be over here soon,
Italian international Paul Vaughan.
There you go. He's got enough of a backstory that every club would take him. Certainly Warrington would. Neil also asked about referee inconsistencies. Kai Pierce-Paul sin bin for a late tackle, which was roundly criticised by some players on social media, which led me to think, well, why don't they referee? Have they got referee qualifications? Do they know all the laws? No. So shut up. And the club should tell them to shut up. And the RFL should fine them so they shut up. But last night, as in Monday, Ratchford just penalised, in my opinion, for a later hit. You watched that game, Phil. Did he hit him late? I didn't see it because I was watching the women's game because I'm on brand.
I'm not sure it's more about being hit late. I think there are some challenges that it is almost impossible to pull out of. It's what you hit them with. And I think both Pierce-Paul and Ratchford led with their shoulder. There wasn't a wrapping round of the arms or an attempt. Sometimes you're clearly not going to get your arms around them because it's split-second stuff. But I think if you run in, head bowed, shoulder first, that's what you're being penalised for. As for inconsistencies, yeah, there always have been, there always will be.
Tony's concerned about the viewing figures. Wakefield Castle got under 75,000, Saints Warrington under 100. Is it the football or much deeper? I don't know. Could be the football. Could be. Was the weather nice? Wakefield Castle was on a Wednesday night, wasn't it? Which is not a usual slot. And people are creatures of habit. If things aren't on when they usually watch them, they get confused. It's like Holby City's not been on at the usual time for weeks. No one knows when it's on. Now they're cancelling it. It's a disgrace. Do you think any of Sky... God, sorry.
So, I mean, just to be fair on the viewing figures, I think that just says what people feel about the competition at the moment. That you're right, habits have been broken, but also playing games on Wednesdays, Mondays. So, we need a regular slot. And I get slots will move around because of the football, mainly because Sky don't have the football. So they will want to fill in with as much live action as they can on nights where there is little or no football, or to put something up against the football. But I just think outside of ourselves, people are not that bothered about what's happening in Super League this year.
I think Sky putting the test card on tonight. So he also says, do you think any of Sky's Rugby League team will lose their jobs as Sky Cup presenters? I'm not sure about that. I think there's a trend in media at the minute, both TV and radio, to try and attract a younger audience by employing younger people, which I'm not necessarily sure ever works, because when I was younger and listened to Five Live, I was not bothered about the age of the presenter. I was bothered about what they knew about. No idea, Tony.
I think it's safe to say that the television contract is now only for 2 years, and I can't see there being too many major changes in how they present the sport.
But hey, we're all big fans of Brian Carney's cardigan. I'm really warm now. I shouldn't have worn this, just for a joke. Andrew says, is it possible we're going back to a part-time sport, possibly back to winter? Oh, not winter. It's cold enough at Bellevue as it is.
I can't see us going back to winter. I would rather, in fact, see us never start in January or February and actually move the beginning to March and be a proper summer sport. But the threat of being semi-professional is a real valid one at the moment. And we've said it for years, if the sport doesn't come to terms with the fact that some of it wants to be and can be full-time and has investors to make it so, and some of it needs to be and should be and thrives on being part-time, but you don't necessarily have to have an open gateway between the two, then we need to reconcile ourselves to that. And if that does mean a return to licensing, to not necessarily having promotion and relegation decided on one season on the field alone, that's what we should be talking about. And that's what I think Lindsay Hoyle is referring to. And I think that's what Shane Richardson is talking about. I think that's what Brian Noble has written about, continues to campaign for. There's a lot of other people out there that are worried about the genuine possibility that if we don't do something and the game slips back to being predominantly part-time, which would mean that some clubs would still be full-time like Wigan were in the 80s and 90s in a part-time environment, that the pull becomes less for broadcasters, investors, sponsors, quality administrators, and we then disappear. We will exist, but we won't be in the public consciousness.
It is that, I think, misnomer with the general public, isn't that rugby league was full-time professional from 1895 onwards, and not that people had jobs. Wakefields' first full-time pro, I believe, was Gary Price when he signed in 88 or something. So, yeah.
Well, Leeds were part-time when Gary Schofield was a full-time player.
What did he do the rest of the time? Worked in a club shop.
He might have told you he had a job, but he definitely didn't. He drove a lard around, that's all.
Larder Reaver.
He's all right anyway.
Good. Because obviously he was in the paper telling everyone his diagnosis last week. So we will see him soon.
It was his birthday last week. So
it was, which
happy birthday.
I found an old tweet we sent out about it. So it was the same day as Canada Day. Toronto have got a new head coach. We'll come to that. Well, we won't come to that in a moment because it's irrelevant for the moment. But we'll come to what happened to their former head coach. Ian says, should the World Cup be pushed back to 2022 as we'll struggle to raise a 17-man squad at this rate with injuries in Super League? And why is Rugby League affected by COVID outbreaks in a way that football and cricket have managed to mostly avoid? Is it the attitudes of players and coaching staff? I think we said it might be attitudes. I think it's attitudes of society in general have become laxer, but the more things open up, the more chance you are of getting it. That's just, I don't know if that's science or not. I've only got GCSE. I'm not one of these great scientist people you find on Twitter.
It's all right. Nobody listens to scientists anyway. On the first part of his question, I am an absolute passionate believer that the World Cup has to go ahead in 2021. I genuinely do not know what the profile and status of rugby league will be over here if we wait another year. I think that if we have it now, and it's an event on the back of, let's hope the Euros being successful, Wimbledon not leading to any mass outbreaks of anything, the Challenge Cup final, building into a World Cup, I reckon we've got a stage and a platform this year, and there's a real willingness for rugby league to occupy that. I think if we put it back now, we will struggle to have that goodwill behind us, and that profile. They'll be in and around a football World Cup, then a Commonwealth Games. I think we have to have it this year by any method we can. As regards why we seem to be more susceptible to COVID, I think your point about the English cricket team says that everybody is susceptible to COVID. They have been in the strictest bubbles over the summer that it's possible to have, and they still now starting to come out of those have managed to have to isolate an entire national team. I think the problem, if you like, that we've got is that we are a sport whereby we are absolutely rock solid in the communities. Our players, don't live in walled mansions on the edge of town. They go shopping in the same places where everybody else does. They have families that work. Rugby league players, even as full-time professionals, have not paid enough at the average level, not at the very elite level, to not have partners that will go out and work, to not have kids that are not in schools or all that. We are going to, the rate is highest in this part of the world, so clearly we are going to come in contact with it.
Even Wimbledon's affected because everyone's forgotten now because we've got the new girl who's any good, but Johanna Konta, she had to pull out because of a close contact in her team.
Yeah.
And they're in bubbles because they can afford to be in bubbles because of the nature of their sport. They're an individual.
And that is the other thing. We cannot afford to be in a category A, tested every day, living together in 5-star hotels. Like I believe the Wimbledon players are all in the same hotel in West London. We can't afford to do that. So we are therefore more susceptible to the vid.
Indeed. We'll talk about London first. Danny Ward has left his job. Obviously, he got them promoted. Then he got relegated, despite the fact they beat St Helens a couple of times just to please Sid there. It just doesn't seem to be happening for them on or off the field. I mean, when I say on the field, they've won 7 games. They're still in the top 6 in the championship. It's not as if they're massively struggling, but they are a full-time squad. And yeah, it's just not working for London at the moment. They'll probably pick up a win at the weekend because they're playing York, who lost to Newcastle at the weekend. But London, 40 years on and still a conundrum.
Yeah, a perennial problem because as a sport, we haven't decided what we want from London. Every week we're looking at Super League games where there are some players who London are, Kai Pearce-Paul is probably the shining light for Wigan at the moment. For all the issues they've got with not being able to score points, one of the positives is they've got a young 20-year-old kid who was born in Bromley, learnt his rugby league at Croydon Hurricanes, picked up by the Broncos Academy. Wigan spotted him and he's now wearing the cherry and white. The game has never reconciled itself to the fact that if we could find a dispensation for London to keep London players in London, they would be a sustainable team in the top flight with all the profile that brings, probably at a ground that stopped them being nomadic with a centre of excellence attached to it. And their best players would, as they move through the ranks, like use him a lot as an example, Louis McCarthy Scarsbrooks, whose family is all still in London and would go back there, and I'm sure will move back there at the end of his playing career. If he could have been guaranteed similar sort of money that he's been getting at St Helens, but had stayed in London with with anybody they've produced, not counting on a salary cap, then he would be the senior professional there that guys like Kai Pearce-Paul would be playing alongside and learning their trade. And I venture to suggest that London would be a top 6 Super League team every year. They'd have a core of fans that they had in the late 1990s, might be 5,000 or 6,000, but it'd be regular, it would be building. They'd be playing at maybe a Wimbledon, but they'd have been established there for quite a while now. We need to find a way of not raiding them, but preserving them. So they become the ultimate yo-yo team. They have a really good year in Super League and very nearly avoid relegation. Danny Ward does a fabulous job. All their best players then get picked off. Or some of their youngsters in their academy decide to play rugby union because they're picked up by Harlequins or whoever it might be that plays. Well, they don't play in London anymore, do they? But southern-based rugby union. You know what I mean? At an age where they get to 18 and they're in the Broncos Academy, the likelihood is they're also in a rugby union academy, and that's the sport they will choose. What have we ever done about schools rugby league in London, where we've seen some fabulous teams play in the Wembley curtain raiser? And again, we've never done the exercise. What has happened to all of their players? I don't remember, and I will happily stand corrected, seeing any of the names that we saw running out for Howard of Effingham School in Surrey when they thrashed Castleford Academy, and we all went, where the hell are these guys coming from? Currently in the London Broncos first team. That should be their path. But we as a sport do not give dispensation. Therefore, London are a yo-yo club and don't ever fulfil the potential that the sport could have in the capital. Danny Ward has done an astonishing job as a player, as a coach. That game in Toronto, which I think will live long in the memory of everyone other than Toronto fans, just the way they went about their business that day when nobody even talked about them. It was all about Toronto were going to Super League, and it's hang on a minute, the opposition just won. How does that work? An amazing job. But I think, again, we're not inside the camp there, but I do feel that he's an ambitious bloke. You know, he was the assistant coach for the Lions. The tour may not have gone well, but you look at, he was deemed to be a coach along with Ian Watson, who perhaps could have been in the frame to, again, pathways, take over from Wayne Bennett if that's the route we'd have wanted to go down. But of all the coaches that could have been picked, he was deemed to be one of two that had the most potential. Now, if he can't fulfil that in London, or if London feel they're underperforming at the moment, the group of players that he's got full-time or not are not of the quality to match Toulouse or Featherstone, because they can't attract those kind of players. You can see why he would want to at some stage move on. The only surprise for me is that it wasn't at the end of a season rather than in the middle of one, unless there is a Super League club that is looking to now bring him on board.
Yeah, you'd assume he wouldn't be able to work for long, would you? Especially as you mentioned, if Wayne Bennett picked you as an assistant, you must have something about you. He knows. I know the Great Tour was rubbish, but he does know something about rugby league, does Wayne Bennett, despite what people will tell you. I mean, I can't say where do London go for a coach. It could be anyone, because as we've seen, as we will talk about in a moment, no one knows anything that's going on in rugby league anymore. But London, like rugby league, we're at some kind of crossroads or roundabout or some kind of road-based analogy where they have to make important decisions and soon. And it's interesting, if it's a sliding doors moment, if London hadn't won that game in Toronto, if Toronto had have won and had a year in Super League before everything happened, how would things have changed? We'll never know. We should send that to the hypothetical podcast people. That they can work that one out. Probably end up the same, because we know how these things tend to happen. But London mid-table, they face York, as mentioned this week. I don't know. It's almost as if, not that results don't matter for London, but that they are, as you say, steady, stable, have a home, and not moving around every 2 seasons, which they have done pretty much for 40 years.
I mean, they've got an investor who's put in not far short of £20 million, probably a conservative estimate over time. But with the greatest respect to him, he's in his 70s. That can't go on forever. I think he would have hoped this year that being a full-time team in a division that is predominantly part-time, if they were third and challenging, likely to be in the promotion mix at the end of the season, it's worth keeping his investment going. Chance maybe of getting back into the Super League, unlikely with the way Toulouse have recruited this year. But to be languishing mid-table and only attracting 250 people to each home game, I'd be seriously looking about whether I still wanted to invest in that and what the future is. And until you hear how much money may be available to the championship, how it's going to be structured, what the plans are, everyone's blueprint that you hear. And I think we need to move away from which clubs would be in and which wouldn't. I think the first thing is you've got to establish what the blueprint is. But virtually everyone I've seen or heard of has London in there. There's strategic reason. And even Sir Lindsay said, London's important. What happens in the capital resonates. So you've got to do it right. And I'm not sure we ever have. 40 years is a phenomenal achievement. Absolutely sensational. But we take a major game to London every year. We're having, all being well, a World Cup semi-final in a new venue in London. It's like we always run down and have a little skirmish and then run back again. We haven't decided what London means and how we're going to make that pay. But there is undoubted talent coming out of London. We just don't know how to harness it. The only way we do is all the other clubs take the best of it.
It was a bit like the mid-80s when they're playing at Crystal Palace or whatever in the second division, and numbers are what they are. We've got a loyal band of supporters who have to move around London. I think, as we always say, people forget London's quite a big place. Going from east to west London is not the same as going from Wakefield to Leeds or whatever. But
and if they've got a supporter in, let's say, Southampton, to be moving from West London, which might be an hour away, to North London, which could be 2.5 hours away, and across some of the most crowded roads, to go and watch your team at home, to travel virtually from, Hull to Widnes every other week, it's a commitment.
At least they have train stations as opposed to link or railway stations, to get that correct. Speaking of London, their former coach, Brian McDermott, has reappeared at Oldham. Oldham, which has great connections to the Wakefield area, of course. Derek Turner, possibly Wakefield's greatest captain, signed from Oldham for Wakefield in the 60s. David Topless, the great man, was the Oldham coach in the late 80s before coming back to Bellevue and gloriously winning the Yorkshire Cup. And coaching France. And, of course, Brian McDermott is from Eastmore, never played for Wakefield, has no real connection to the club. But he used to coach London, and now he's the coaching consultant, which I think is a kind of job. Consultant is a great job title. I think I gave myself that when I was at Wakefield for a couple of months, so I didn't have a job title. But he is a coaching consultant at Oldham, who just got rid of Matt Diskin. I forgot to ask Danny Ward. He's off to Leeds, isn't he? And Richard Agar's going to be director of rugby, and that's what's going to happen.
You said that.
Yeah. Well, I just thought I'd throw it in there because someone say I didn't mention it if I didn't. But yeah, back to Brian McDermott. He's off to Oldham. I mean, the Oldham podcast people, our friends, they're very excited. And so they should be, because he's the most successful coach of the last 10 years or whatever. Now, granted at Oldham, which, let me check the league table, they're just above Swinton. They've won 2 of their 11 games, although they are only 2 games behind York in the table. So if they beat Bradford this weekend, come on, Oldham. They've closed that gap.
Interesting that his first game should be against Bradford as well.
I mean, he obviously hasn't got the level of talent there, no disrespect to Oldham, that he had at Leeds when he was winning grand finals and world championships and whatever. But he is a coach who you think would inspire these players, wouldn't you? If you're a team who are second bottom of the championship and suddenly Brian McDermott turns up, that's going to be a massive boost.
I think there are a few things at play here. One is clearly, as you rightly say, it's not necessarily who he's got to work with, it's his presence and aura. And I think there's no doubt as well that not only will he get a level of performance out of them, but he'll come up with the game plans they need to win the matches that they need. He clearly has a relationship with Chris Hamilton, the Oldham chairman, again, somebody who's done amazing work to keep a club afloat and alive, and admires what Chris Hamilton has done. I think the other thing we need to look at from Brian McDermott's point of view is there is a significant amount of time now that he has not been paid and is actually owed money. And the reason why I think it's only to the end of this year is that it's a bridging point for him as well. It keeps him involved in the sport. He has other irons in the fire as regards coaching, I believe, but none of those can happen at the moment. So clearly he wants to keep coaching on his CV. He wants to give Oldham the best chance possible of staying in whatever the championship is going to look like. And I think that's the other thing, that Chris Hamilton is wary of the future. But what he does know is whatever it looks like, he has to be in the championship come the end of this season. And if there even is an amalgamation of some teams from League One with some teams in the Championship, so there will only be 2 divisions. What he doesn't want to be is cast into League One because of relegation and then crossing his fingers that he might be one of the teams that is still allowed to be in the Championship. He needs his team to stay up. And if bringing Brian McDermott in even for a dozen matches assures that, or ensures that, and there's no given there, but I think he's certainly increased the chances of that happening, then if I was some of the clubs towards the bottom end of the table at the moment, I'd be a bit wary of Oldham now. I think there will be a bounce. I think Brian McDermott will relish getting on a field with some players. He'll simplify everything. He'll tell them exactly what's expected of them. He won't change too much because he can't. We're already in season. Probably won't get many, if any, players because there aren't any that you can go and get. But it's a really bold and brave appointment by Oldham. And I just suspect that it might have the desired effect.
It's I'm going to compare him to another Brian. It's like when Brian Clough went to Brighton. He's had his successful spell at Derby, and obviously Leeds didn't work out. That's Toronto there. And now he's gone to Brighton, and then he comes back and he bounces back and he wins back-to-back European Cups at Forest. So I don't know where he goes after this. Maybe he stays at Oldham forever. Maybe Oldham become Nottingham Forest. I don't know. It doesn't work in terms of that analogy, but what is important is he's got to see him back in the game.
And it's a brilliant coup for Oldham as well, because it was never leaked anywhere, came as a complete surprise. Everybody who actually saw that went, wow, that is as left field comes. But as you say, but he's a Marmite figure, and he always will be. But what he is a voice that will be worth hearing.
Good to have him back in the game. Is that all the issue stuff we've talked about? I don't think. Are there any other issues?
why Wigan can't score a point at the moment.
Well, that's matches. Let's go through the Super League, where Castleford
won't take long.
No, where Castleford lost to St Helens 24-0, but then beat Huddersfield 24-0 last night. It was a great game. Danny Richardson scored 24 drop goals. I sent Paul McShane to Phil yesterday, but I decided it would be Danny Richardson. But he's injured, isn't he?
What a turnaround to go.
Amazing.
48-point turnaround.
Oh. Imagine if they do that at Wembley, having lost them 24-0 the week before. Anyway, Wakefield didn't play Salford. That was called off, as was Hull FC. We knew about that. Huddersfield 12, Catalans 50. I mean, Huddersfield, the curate's egg of Super League at the minute. I have kind of got off my theory of, they'll turn good eventually, because they're now below Wakefield in the table, and I know where we are. But let's not take anything away from the Catalans, because they are super good, 50 points away from home in Huddersfield on a Thursday night.
8 shared across
the team.
Try scores, which I think again says a lot about how they're playing at the moment. They have conquered their travel sickness. You know, long gone is the days when Scully would sit here going, they can't travel. They've played the bulk of their games so far this season away from France, and they've come up with a process by which it's working for them. Not only do they have the routine that works, but I think they just genuinely do have across the squad, covering virtually every position. They've got that mix of established players that have a really good attitude, but young guys coming through who are pushing them, who are French, who are exciting. And it's a great balance, and I think they are duly at the top of the league because they clearly not only deserve to be, but have got a very, very good team this year. Huddersfield, I feel old because Will Price made his debut. I remember his dad making his debut. But there are clearly issues at Huddersfield that are part COVID related. And Ian Watson is in that transition process where I don't think he's got the squad that he fully wants at the moment. They're already rumoured to have made some signings in the halfbacks for sure for next year, and some players who were there I think know that they are leaving. I still think Ian Watson will turn it round, but I just don't think it'll be this season now.
I do like the fact it's an open secret agencies is obviously signing for Leeds. Otherwise, they wouldn't have asked Richard Agar about it on the telly the other day. Because you don't ask questions like that if you don't already A, know the answer, and B, know they're going to give you the answer you kind of want.
I think it's safe to say he didn't deny it, did he?
No, we're not interested in signing. Leeds Rhinos 48, Leeds Centurions 18. This looks like from the try scores a very young and not full of superstars Leeds Rhinos side. And I know Lee are what they are, but important to get a win, especially when you've got so many inexperienced players out there.
That was a potential banana skin, and I think if Lee were going to turn their season around, that should have been a game that they targeted to win. They scored very early as well, and you would have thought that would have infused them with confidence. I don't know what it is about Lee. They cannot sustain pressure, and that would be a worry now halfway through the season. As for Leeds, the senior players who are playing virtually every other day, the Matt Pryors, the Cruz Leemings, just astounding. The kids that are full of enthusiasm, like Jack Broadbent, who claimed 4 tries that night, and Morgan Gannon, 17, playing in the second row in Super League. That's great, but I think one of the things that shouldn't be lost sight of, and obviously we'll roll that on to Leeds playing again on Monday and probably having their best performance of the season in a win at Warrington. Return of Robert Louis shouldn't be underestimated. He's clearly not match fit. He's done literally 2 training sessions and very little, if hardly any, pre-season. But just having a bespoke standoff in the middle of the field, organising his teammates, kicking on the last tackle. Suddenly you've got an option on the last tackle, which was an Achilles heel of Leeds earlier in the season. Made a huge difference. Absolutely. So, no, I think Leeds are in a fine vein of form at the moment, considering the duress of the fixtures. Just outside
the... they'll be inside the top 6 now, won't they?1because obviously this paper was produced after.
They're not quite on percentage.
Right. I can't work out percentages. Oh, yeah, because okay, I've played the last games, haven't they? The Wigan conundrum then. Their players are on Twitter moaning about referees. But maybe they should be asking themselves questions about why they are not where they are. I know Warrington are a good team. Are they 26 points better than Wigan away from home? I don't know. Well, they were, because that's on the scoreboard. That's true. Wigan won 7 in a row, didn't they? And the wheels have very much, like Dick Dastardly's car, fallen off. Hat-trick for Jake Mamma, which was great because he was on the telly, did his interview, and then he's off to Cass. Positive reinforcement crew.
He was. I mean, you want him to get the man of the match every time he plays, because you have no idea A, what he's going to say, and B, when he said it, what he's actually said. But that is copy. He is a character. We talked. Our listeners keep mentioning characters are going out of the game. He is one, and he was funny, you know. And then the following day to be announced as leaving this positive reinforcement crew anyway was, again, you just have to laugh. But no, I think Warrington are still Jekyll and Hyde. A decent performance at Wigan, and from their point of view, pretty convincing in all aspects. And then made, I think, 19 mistakes against Leeds. We're playing against 11 men at the close of that game and still couldn't fashion enough to win it. That's Warrington. You know, everybody gets carried away when they win 6 in a row and they're the real deal and they play themselves back into championship contention, and then they come up with a display against the Rhinos where, if you're just looking at what they didn't do as opposed to perhaps the exceptional performances of some of the Rhinos on the other side, even their coach, Steve Price, just said they clearly weren't good enough. You have to be consistent. Consistent teams win the grand final.
Yeah, we'll come back to Wigan in a minute then. We'll talk about this, because that last 10 minutes where Leeds had to just defend and defend and defend with 12 men, then 11 men. That Warrington have, you know, their key halfbacks out there, all their star names, apart from Greg Inglis, which I forgot about. But couldn't break through the Leeds defence despite having 1 man, 2 man advantage. That's a great lack of composure, and I guess why people say, well, you know, they win some games, but they're not going to win the big game at the end of the season.
So it's a lack of leadership in those moments. You know, who is the dominant player? Is it Blake Austin? Is it Darrell Clark? You know, who's going to get their hands on the ball the most and say, right, you know, you can imagine. And I'm only using this as an example. If that was St Helens in that situation, either James Roby or Johnny Lomax would be saying, right, this is what we're doing for the next 10 minutes. I want the ball. I want it here, and I want it early. And what I want is Tommy Makins to be ready for a long cut-out pass, because clearly we're playing against a team where we can create an overlap. I didn't see anybody in the Warrington ranks saying, it's my responsibility either to take the ball in. It was all individuals doing individual things. And I'm not sure at the moment that Darrell Clark coming off the bench is working for them. He seems to be almost not exerting a sufficient influence on the game that I think he would want to. And I think, again, without Gareth Widdop, they didn't have somebody. You can just imagine if Widdop had been on the field, he would have said, right, you know, I know how this pans out. We win it in the last minute. We breathe a sigh of relief. We say we didn't play very well, but we did what we had to do. There was nothing. I thought, you know, even listening to Phil Clark's analysis when after the game, when you watch it back, you know, I think he directed some criticism at Josh Thewlis. He's one of the young players in the team. He's you know, he needed directing by somebody inside him. Where do you need to be? You know, Tom Lynham not scoring on 2 occasions where clearly it's harder not to score than score. Those are the moments where you do that at Old Trafford in a grand final. That's why you don't win the competition. That was a worrying result for Warrington on the back of the fact that, was it complacency? Was it an acceptance that when you win a number of games, well, we've cracked it, when actually you haven't? So that, you know, for all the Warrington are in the mix, there are still question marks.
This podcast is anti-Warrington, has been established before.
I think you look at the way they played in the Challenge Cup against Castleford. That again was an opportunity on paper to not be 19-0 down at half time. You look at the fact that against Leeds, who were, if you start off in the most dynamic way you can against a team that's playing, you know, what's their 3rd game in a week, you would think that you wouldn't be 18-6 down or 26 down at half time. There's something not quite right attitudinally in Warrington.
I don't want to have a look at the fixtures coming up because they'll all change anyway. But Wigan versus Huddersfield, which doesn't kick off at 6:30 on Sunday for obvious reasons now, is a big game for Wigan because that is a game where you would think with Huddersfield being in the form they're in, Wigan should be looking at that one and thinking, well, this is the game that maybe they just need a win to kickstart everything again. I don't know. They are without Bevan French. They are without Zach Hardick. Is he back this week? I can't remember when his suspension ends.
It's a neck injury now, so I think he was out for a month. I don't know whether that's up or not. The thing is, there's no point saying who isn't available anymore because every club has players who are not available. It might be how many you've got available. It's degrees of who you can select from, but let's just take it as read from here on in. Every club is going to be without players, so that it's pointless mentioning Bevan French because he's not here for the rest of the season. They have to make the best of it. The issue for Wigan, I think, is that some of their younger forwards are not living up to their potential, and when you put Jackson Hastings at fullback, you're losing too much on attack. They need to find a solution that works best for them, and again, Adrian Lamb is clinging on to his job at the moment. Wigan need to do something about that. They need to say, look, you're definitely here till the end of the season, or Sean Wayne has been approached. He is, whatever the white noise that surrounds a club, that affects how a team plays. And I think at the moment there's too much going on about Wigan. Who's going to be there? Who's not going to be there? How they're going to play? How they're not going to play? How they perceive themselves to be? What the rest of the campaign holds for them? The fact that they're not in the Challenge Cup final in a fortnight's time. Again, questions raised about who is the leader in that team. Harry Smith needs some protection and support at the moment. I think they're just expecting too much of him. Players who are outstanding and who are rock solid are being asked to do too much. So Willie Isa, Liam Farrell, are they playing in the centre? Are they playing in the second row? Can they look after all the other young kids as well as play the game that that they're being asked to play? Is the recruitment good enough to be a trophy-winning team? And if it's not, then can that be laid at the door of the coach?
Well, Willie Ice is not playing anywhere for 2 weeks because of his own stupidity. And I didn't see Zach Hardick or Sam Tompkins comment on their current or former teammates' stupidity while they did about the referee giving a yellow card to Kai Pearce-Paul. So be consistent about it and criticise players as well as referees, or just shut up when a match is on.
That would be the better option.
It would be, wouldn't it? Maybe their agents should have a word with these people on their clubs.
We want them to be characters, and we want them to say stuff. But criticising a referee, I'm I don't know, Robert Hicks or whoever, and I have had feedback that a player A has criticised me on social media for a decision I actually might have got right. Then the next time player A comes anywhere near me, I give a penalty against him for no good reason. And when he comes over protesting, saying, sir, I'll just say, checked your social media recently? Go and stand 10 metres away.
It's dissent. It needs to be cut. It's like the clubs doing the things about, we look forward, that pass that the other team scored from. Grow some, sort it out. It's easy. NFL needs some money. This is an easy way of getting some money by fining people. That was Super League because everything else was postponed or cancelled. Bradford beat Batley 30 points to 16 because George Galloway can't win in Batley, but he can win in Bradford. Dewsbury 18, Sheffield 18 in another exciting draw for the Eagles, who've now drawn 3 this season. Is there a record for draws in a season? There must be. I don't know what it is though.
It's quite a few in the days when they used to play 40 odd matches a year.
Featherstone beat London 63-14.
Which again, I think is one of the reasons why, Danny Ward doesn't stand or fall by one result, but You're a full-time team and you go to a part-time team and you get turned over by that amount, then you, as an owner, you suddenly start thinking it's not quite right at the moment.
Halifax 17, Widnes 16, again delayed due to the weather. And that's a good comeback from Fax because they were 16-6 down at half-time, so I don't know whether they're playing towards the shallow end in the second half or not, but got the win there. Whitehaven 36, Swinton 22. Big game at the bottom of the table. Whitehaven pulling themselves away slightly. And probably the biggest result in the Championship in terms of, well, not a shock necessarily, but York 26, Newcastle 28. Great win for the Thunder, who are moving in the right direction. They had a slow start, but they're just outside they're not just outside the playoffs. They're 3 wins behind the teams who are in the playoffs. But in terms of league table, they are. So it's looking much better for them. Well, that's positive because Newcastle is one of these growth areas, which hopefully doesn't become. Yes.
York. But now York are clearly struggling on the field at the moment. They can't get a settled pair of halfbacks. But again, I think a bit like Castleford, looking ahead to that 80 minutes of Wembley means more to the York club than anything else. Well, obviously, if they got relegated, that would mean a lot to them, but I don't think they will. I think there's too much quality in their team. And Wembley is a distraction, no matter what people say.
Danny Kerman's getting to play at Wembley. League One, Barrow 31, Doncaster 6. Our listener, Tony, because we have individual listeners, he went to that game as a Doncaster supporter. I bet he really enjoyed it. I mean, he did take a picture of a submarine, so that was good. And he got to see
2,000 fans there again.
Yeah. And he got to see the end of what appears to be a very tasty game between the Barrow ladies and Oldham, which had 3 yellow cards in or something. I'd love to have seen that. As mentioned, Coventry 46, Hunslet 44, North Wales 34, Keighley 28. So another good result there for the Crusaders. Rochdale 22, London Scholars 4, and Workington 66, West Wales 0. So I don't know what's happening at West Wales, but we could say that every week. And
they were very positive when they came on the podcast about what this season held. And whilst the margin of defeat on a weekly basis isn't as bad as it has been, there are still clearly issues. But then Wales, much as everything we said about London, is an area where Rugby League needs to take a bit of responsibility for. And I think that Gareth Keir is doing a sensational job as CEO of Wales Rugby League. I think what they've done with the women's game, a massive win for Cardiff women in their first game in the Women's Super League South. I think what they're doing with junior pathways, there's a link up with Salford and the college game down there. All of their wheelchair programs and LDL and PDRL, some really good things going on in Wales. I just feel it needs a focus at the top level. And again, we will at one point revisit the decision not to give Celtic Crusaders a licence and say it's another of those missed opportunities in the sport, that there are always going to be owners that we have issues with. But at what point does the sport of rugby league take responsibility for its own development? Melbourne have had issues. The NRL have taken over the club, or News Corporation have taken over the club, because they saw the strategic presence needed of Melbourne in their competition. We've gone London, stand or fall by half a result in Super League. All the goodwill that you built up gone overnight. Celtic Crusaders, had maybe an owner who couldn't fulfil what he was promising. But we had Celtic Crusaders on the verge of the playoffs in Super League. People like, I don't know, British Lions at the time thinking of signing for them. And Gavin Henson was on the verge of signing for Celtic Crusaders 10 years before he became a news story at West Wales. What do we know?
How many games did Greg Inglis play for Warrington?
3.
Oh, so he played more than Gavin Henson has played for West Wales, because he played in the Cup, so he's played.
Gareth Thomas was an undoubted success story for Rugby League. I know he got his 100 caps for Rugby Union. I know he's a go-to man still about Rugby Union affairs. But if Celtic Crusaders were still a top-flight team, then Gareth Thomas would be furthering their cause as an ambassador for them, talking about how he said it when he came to the sport. I wished I'd come to Rugby League earlier. Wales, going right back to the very earliest days of the Northern Union split, has been a key market for us that we've never done properly.
Greg Inglis, he's finished, which is a shame for him and a shame for Warrington, a shame for the people who were looking forward to seeing him this year, especially a shame for the Warrington merchandisers who've got all that gear to get rid of now. Always not a risk signing a player who'd retired already. I'm never sure it was the signing people expected it to be, because while everyone in rugby league circles knows who Greg Inglis is, no one else does, because no one knows about rugby league. So it's not as if when Sonny Bill Williams came and played his however many games for Toronto, he was a worldwide superstar or whatever. Greg Inglis is very much a superstar in our own world. But a shame to see it end so soon, because obviously he seems to have been very positive about his time in the country at a time where, you know, he didn't have to come over in the first place with COVID and everything, but he did. No one can doubt his efforts in that, but just hasn't worked out for him.
No, and I think, yes, it was a gamble, but commercially for Warrington as a club, it was definitely worth taking. I think he's had a real positive influence around the place, talking to some of their young guys that are coming through. The fact that he is staying on, clearly, I think that is a way of paying the remainder of his contract whilst getting him to do a non-playing job. Even though he's a volunteer mentor, we all appreciate that. I suspect that some of his extraneous expenses will be taken care of. And it enables him to sign George Williams sooner rather than later. So it won't not work out for Warrington, but it is a shame we didn't get to see him play at the level. We may never have gotten to see him at test level, but he clearly could have graced the pitches of Super League and given us somebody else to talk about. And I don't blame Warrington for bringing him over. It's just a shame the way, for all parties, it ended.
Now it's time for the Women's Super League. After an hour of the podcast. I mentioned Huddersfield didn't tweet out a team sheet on Sunday. Neither did Warrington. And I think it's disrespectful to the players more than anything, because I am well aware of the pressures that people at clubs are under in terms of they have a million things to do and probably have more things to do put on them than people above them realise that they can do. Especially when you've got one or two people working in a media department. It can't be a department if it's one person, can it?
Absolutely.
But you can't just magic up a video within 5 minutes, which I think some people think at times. There is an actual craft to this. I mean, not this, but, you know, the thing. But not to tweet out a team. I couldn't say if you can't...
Standards. There has to, if you're going to call something Super League, there has to be minimum standards.
If you can't live tweet a game, I understand that. You can't be there. You know, that's fine. You know, it's not ideal. You probably should do, but if you're not, fair enough. But not to put out a team sheet, disrespectful. On the field, well, I'll talk about Monday's game first, which I haven't got the score for because I've got the paper in front of me. And of course, it was played after. St Helens beat Castleford. Again, talking about standards, both teams had players without names or numbers on the backs of their shirts, which I found very odd, especially when one of them was the captain of England. I don't know where
but again, you know, we'll repeat ourselves ad nauseum. If you're going to be on Twitch, which is taking the sport to a different audience, if you're going to build personalities, the bare minimum requirement is a shirt with a name and a number.
It is.
It's a little thing, but it's massively important.
But Saints won, as you'd expect, because they've got the England squad, and Castleford have not got the England squad anymore. But, you know, Castleford tried, and, you know, they will continue to improve as the season goes on because they're having to rebuild midway through a season, which they didn't expect to do. They are still fourth. No, they will be fourth in the Super League table, I think. Oh, they might be. I can't with these percentages. It's a nightmare. The bad news for Castleford is York have now won their last two games 24-0. Now, they would have beaten Bradford this week. You know, I would have predicted that. But I don't think I would have predicted them to beat Saints the week before because I saw the cup final on the telly and Saints beat them in the cup final convincingly. So York have picked up 2 wins, one of which I don't think they would have won because of this forfeiture thing. But some games aren't forfeited and some games are. And it's all a mess. And I don't think you said the men's Super League table is compromised for various reasons. I think they certainly compromised at the women's Super League table, especially when there are far fewer fixtures to be played. But hey, who cares what I think? So that was Monday's game. I watched it on Twitch. It was all right. The thing is, there's lots of young players in the competition, and I think they need to be encouraged. And
well, you interviewed a couple from Wakefield who
did
again suffered what might be termed a a disheartening defeat if you were to look solely at the league table. And they are just the most positive, enthusiastic, keen players you could have wished to have interviewed after a defeat.
Oh, we should have won, Phil. We were winning because Wakefield, we were winning, and then they scored just on half time, and then that was it. 40 points to 14. Well done to Huddersfield. Brown with a hat trick. I assume it was because it says in the paper that's who it was. Liv Whitehead was one of the players we spoke to who scored 2 tries and got injured. Go back and watch those interviews. These people are enthusiastic. They're good. I like them. Wigan beat Featherstone 36-10. The thing that strikes me about the weekend is, and you can't do it, but how cricket have done their women's competition. And obviously in the county championship in men's cricket, it's been established for hundreds of years now that you have the counties. But in the women's Super League, they've gone a different route and had areas. And I know it couldn't have worked, but I do wonder how strong a Calder would have been in this competition compared to the 3 constituent parts. Because when you look at it, and someone's mentioned this to me before, if you're Wakefield, you're fighting to attract players in West Yorkshire, along with Castleford, Featherstone, Bradford, Huddersfield now in there, Leeds. Where do you pick people up from? It's all right for Warrington and Wigan and Saints because they're the only 3 on that side of the Pennines.
No, I get that.
And I wouldn't want that to happen because I want the individual identity of the clubs. But and it's a strange competition because you have got an obvious development there of young talent, as we mentioned with the young players at Wakefield there, and throughout the competition.
But as you've hinted, there is the debate that everybody should be having about what we want the elite end of our competition, be it men's, women's, wheelchair, to look like. And if it is clubs that can sustain multiple teams, and the original teams retain their identity. Let's take your analogy there for the women and the Calder region. If Super League had less teams and one of them was Calder, and feeding that was a championship division that had Wakefield, Castleford and Featherstone in it, you get the local derbies that everybody needs that will attract players, and the cream of those players then go and play at what is genuinely then a Super League. There's a logic to that. And then if you start replicating that across the various divisions, so a team has a men's team, a women's team, an under-23s team, an academy team, possibly not a scholarship team, but a pathway through into representative teams at town and county level, down into some kind of a schools competition run by their respective foundations, which are really strong. A wheelchair team, a women's development team, a netball team, or another sport team, a community netball team. You're suddenly building for the future super clubs. And if that sustains the sport and everybody retains their identity because of it, there's a way of saying everybody wins.
It's interesting, isn't it, in the Netball Super League that 2 of the franchises are names of rugby union clubs in Wasps and Saracens.
Absolutely.
Leeds Rhinos in there as well. I don't know. I just looked and I thought, obviously Castleford were successful and got to those 2 finals and won the League Leaders Shield and win the semi-finals this year, but they've lost a lump of talent which has just transplanted itself to a different club and nothing has changed.
Which is down quite understandably to those who have left being offered expenses. Well, this is how Northern Union started. The moving around of players was purely around, why were Batley so dominant in the early years of Northern Union? Because that was a very rich at the time mill town who could offer either work or money or both to some of the best players. Hunslet were thriving at the turn of the 20th century because all of the light industry of the nation was based around that part of South Leeds, and that attracted workers, it attracted talent, it attracted fans and sponsors, and that's that's not changed. If you offer half of the Castleford women's team the ability to at least get some recompense for their talent, there's absolutely no reason why they shouldn't take it. But are you just, are you almost dismantling one thing to create something else? That doesn't move the game forward.
I don't want to take opportunities away from people. I just want everything to be better, especially
the best it can be.
Especially when a World Cup's coming up and we know what's going to happen, and everyone's going to come off the back of it and go, "Why are we so far behind the Australians?"
Well, they might say that, or they might say, "Isn't it brilliant that we've seen the most amazing quality of women's rugby league? It's incredibly entertaining. The difference is some are full-time, some are part-time. How do we make our part-time players full-time? What is in the system at the moment for enabling women who play under this banner of Super League at some point be paid, even if it's only a part-time payment, because that's all they want, because they all have jobs outside the game, would want to retain those jobs in A&E and teaching and whatever. What is the plan when money is decreasing in the sport to get women paid?
Sign for York or get a job with the BBC. Speaking of the BBC, I was speaking to one of their correspondents at the weekend as Leeds beat Warrington 56-0. See, Leeds, they should have known Leeds were going to beat Warrington in the men's Super League as well. But I did. I tipped them by 6. Thanks to Luke Moore and Robert Louis for that help at the end. 56-0. Can't say it was a very exciting game because it was 56-0. I did ask the 18th woman, which is not her nickname, as opposed to the 18th man. He says with a raised eyebrow, for those who know. Who I should speak to after the game. Well, I spoke to Courtney Winfield Hill, forgot to set the camera going. She did point out I got a new camera. I said, yeah, it's not mine, it's my wife's. I've got it for Christmas. Now I've stolen it to use for this thing. And Kira Bennett, who was just come back from injury, playing number 9. She was really good. Her distribution was superb for Leeds. And it was good to see. You tend to see different things in different games that you haven't noticed before. And I hadn't seen her much because she'd been injured, but her distribution was really crucial to that. And the fact that Hannah Butcher was back for Leeds as well. Yeah, and they were really good.
The big thing for the women's game is the fixture between Wigan and Leeds this week. The two unbeaten teams at the top of the table play each other.
Which is not on Twitch. Because they've put Bradford, who couldn't raise a team last week, versus Super Wakefield. Tara Moxon, I didn't get a chance to ask her because I interviewed other people and said she could play for Papua New Guinea in the World Cup.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I don't know if she's going to do or not, because she was in the England. Was it the performance? When I was at Wakefield briefly, I interviewed her and she was in one of the squads. Not the elite one, but the one below, or was it the students? I can't remember. She was in some kind of England squad anyway. So she's in the England system, but...
Oh, yeah, no. I think she should be an orchid.
Right, Phil, we're done, because you've said you've got to go, and I've got to get ready for work. I've got to get, deliveries to undo, the wheels of commerce need to keep turning. Well, I think we've spoken about this, everything anyway. We'll be back in our normal place on Monday, fingers crossed, to talk more about Rugby League. And
as we say, it'll be coming home.
It will be. It's coming home, as will the Challenge Cup and the 1895 Cup the week after.
Indeed.
Fingers crossed. Where's it coming home to, though, Phil? Italy.
Well, it's coming home to a shop in North Leeds where we'll do our normal podcast from.
We'll do. So thank you for watching and listening and making us not the most successful Rugby League podcast out there. Because who would want to be top? Because then all you can be when you're at the top is be knocked down.
Just want to improve every week.